It's a quiet December evening in the central Indian city of Bhopal. The air is still and cool as families settle in for the night. Street vendors pack up their stalls while the last buses rumble through the narrow lanes of the old city. In the sprawling neighborhood surrounding the Union Carbide pesticide plant, thousands of residents drift off to sleep, unaware that within hours their lives would be changed forever. This is the story of what many consider the world's worst industrial disaster. A tragedy so devastating that its effects are still felt today, more than 4 decades later. By the time the sun rose on December 3, 1984, thousands would be dead, and hundreds of thousands more would be poisoned by a toxic cloud that swept through the city like a silent killer. How did a routine maintenance operation at a chemical plant turn into a catastrophe of unimaginable proportions? What series of events led to the release of 40 tons of deadly gas into the night air? And why, despite decades of legal battles and international outcry, do the survivors still fight for justice today? By the end of this investigation, you'll understand not just what happened that terrible night, but how a complex web of corporate negligence, safety failures, and human error created the perfect storm for disaster. You'll discover the shocking truth about how one of America's most respected companies operated a facility with safety standards that would never have been tolerated back home. And you'll learn why this tragedy continues to serve as a haunting reminder of what happens when profit is placed above human life. But to understand how everything went so catastrophically wrong, we need to go back to the beginning. The Union Carbide Corporation was founded in 1917 and grew to become one of America's industrial giants. By the 1960s, the company was expanding aggressively into international markets, drawn by lower labor costs and fewer regulatory constraints in developing nations. India, with its massive population and growing agricultural sector, represented an enormous opportunity for pesticide sales. In 1969, Union Carbide established its Indian subsidiary and began constructing a state-of-the-art pesticide manufacturing facility in Bhopal. The plant was designed to produce Sevin, a popular insecticide that required methyl isocyanate, or MIC, as a key ingredient. This chemical compound was extraordinarily dangerous, capable of causing severe burns, blindness, and death, even in small concentrations. The Bhopal plant was initially hailed as a symbol of modern industrial progress. Local politicians celebrated the jobs it would create, while Union Carbide executives praised the facility as evidence of their commitment to serving global markets. The company invested heavily in the complex, installing sophisticated equipment and promising to maintain the same safety standards used at their facilities in the United States. For the first several years of operation, the plant functioned smoothly. Production levels met targets, safety incidents remained minimal, and the facility generated substantial profits for both Union Carbide and its Indian partners. The sprawling complex employed over 1,000 workers and became one of the largest industrial operations in the region. But beneath the surface, problems were already beginning to emerge. As early as 1976, trade unions at the plant began raising concerns about safety conditions. Workers complained of inadequate protective equipment, insufficient training on chemical hazards, and pressure to maintain production schedules even when equipment malfunctioned. These concerns intensified throughout the late 1970s as the plant experienced a series of minor accidents. Chemical leaks, equipment failures, and worker injuries became increasingly common, though most incidents were kept quiet to avoid regulatory scrutiny. Internal company documents would later reveal that Union Carbide was well aware of these problems, but chose to address them with minimal investment and temporary fixes. By 1982, the situation had deteriorated significantly. Facing declining demand for pesticides in India and mounting financial losses, Union Carbide began implementing cost-cutting measures that would prove catastrophic. The company reduced the plant's workforce by nearly half eliminated key safety positions, and deferred essential maintenance on critical equipment. The most dangerous decision involved the storage of methyl isocyanate. Originally, the plant had been designed to use MIC immediately after production, minimizing the amount stored on site. But as production schedules became irregular, the company began storing larger quantities of the deadly chemical in massive underground tanks. Each tank could hold up to 60 tons of MIC, creating a potential weapon of mass destruction in the heart of a densely populated city. Even more troubling were the changes made to the plant's safety systems. The refrigeration unit designed to keep MIC at safe temperatures was shut down to save electricity costs. The gas scrubber system, meant to neutralize toxic emissions, was taken offline for maintenance and never properly restored. The flare tower, designed to burn off dangerous gases, had been out of service for months. These cost-cutting measures were implemented despite repeated warnings from plant engineers and safety inspectors. Internal memos documented concerns about the deteriorating safety infrastructure, but corporate executives consistently prioritized short-term savings over long-term risk management. The situation was made worse by the plant's location. When construction began in 1969, the facility had been built on the outskirts of Bhopal, surrounded by relatively sparse development. But over the following 15 years, the city had grown rapidly around the plant. Thousands of families, many of them poor migrants drawn by industrial jobs, had built homes and established communities in the immediate vicinity of the chemical complex. By 1984, an estimated 100,000 people lived within a 3-mile radius of the Union Carbide plant. Shanty towns and established neighborhoods alike sat directly downwind from the facility, creating a densely packed urban area with no evacuation routes and no emergency response systems designed to handle a major chemical release. The Indian government had minimal oversight of the facility's operations. Union Carbide had successfully lobbied for reduced regulatory scrutiny, arguing that excessive inspections would hamper industrial development. Local officials, eager to maintain the jobs and tax revenue generated by the plant, were reluctant to impose strict safety requirements that might drive the company to relocate elsewhere. This regulatory environment allowed Union Carbide to operate with safety standards far below what would have been acceptable at their American facilities. The company took advantage of India's less stringent environmental laws, weaker labor protections, and limited industrial safety enforcement to maximize profits while minimizing safety investments. As 1984 progressed, warning signs continued to mount. Plant workers reported increasing numbers of minor chemical exposures. Equipment breakdowns became more frequent, and several small leaks of toxic gases were detected but not properly investigated. Yet production continued, and corporate executives remained focused on reducing costs rather than addressing the growing safety crisis. By December, the stage was set for disaster. The plant was operating with skeleton crews, degraded safety systems, and massive quantities of one of the world's most dangerous chemicals stored in conditions that violated the company's own safety protocols. What happened next would expose just how dangerous this toxic combination had become. The evening shift on December 2nd began like any other. A small crew of operators took their positions throughout the sprawling facility, while supervisors conducted routine checks of the various production units. The atmosphere was relaxed, almost casual, as the workers went about their familiar tasks with the confidence that comes from years of repetition. At approximately 9:30 that night, operators in the MIC production area noticed something unusual. Water had somehow entered one of the storage tanks containing over 40 tons of methyl isocyanate. This was no minor concern. Water and MIC create an extremely dangerous combination, triggering a runaway chemical reaction that generates enormous heat and pressure while producing deadly gases. The exact source of this water contamination remains a subject of fierce debate to this day. Union Carbide would later claim that a disgruntled employee had deliberately sabotaged the system by connecting a water hose directly to the storage tank. Plant workers and independent investigators disputed this account, pointing instead to a pattern of equipment failures and maintenance shortcuts that made contamination almost inevitable. What cannot be disputed is what happened once the water made contact with the stored MIC. The chemical reaction began slowly, almost imperceptibly, as temperature and pressure readings in Tank 610 started to climb. Plant operators, working with inadequate monitoring equipment and limited training on emergency procedures, initially dismissed these changes as normal fluctuations. As the hours passed, the situation inside the tank became increasingly unstable. The temperature soared past safe operating limits, while pressure built to dangerous levels. The chemical reaction was accelerating, feeding on itself in a process that would soon become impossible to control. Shortly after midnight, the first workers began to notice a strange smell in the air around the MIC storage area. The odor was sharp and acrid, like burning plastic mixed with something much more sinister. Several operators complained of burning eyes and difficulty breathing, but supervisors attributed these symptoms to minor leaks that could be addressed during the next maintenance cycle. By 12:40 a.m., the situation had escalated beyond anyone's ability to manage. Tank 610 was experiencing a complete runaway reaction, with internal pressure reaching levels that threatened to rupture the massive steel container. Plant operators scrambled to activate emergency systems, only to discover that most of the safety equipment had been disabled or was not functioning properly. The gas scrubber system, designed to neutralize toxic emissions, had been shut down for maintenance weeks earlier. The refrigeration unit that should have kept the MIC at safe temperatures had been disconnected to save on electricity costs. Even the water curtain system meant to knock down escaping gases was operating at reduced pressure due to maintenance deferrals. At approximately 1 a.m., the inevitable occurred. A massive pressure relief valve on tank 610 opened, releasing a deadly cloud of methyl isocyanate and other toxic compounds directly into the night air. The gas was heavier than air, so instead of dissipating harmlessly into the atmosphere, it began to spread along the ground like a poisonous fog. Plant workers in the immediate area were the first to be affected. Those closest to the release point collapsed within minutes as the toxic vapor destroyed their respiratory systems. Others managed to flee, but not before inhaling enough of the chemical to cause permanent damage to their lungs, eyes, and nervous systems. The plant's alarm system finally activated, but it was far too late. By this point, tons of deadly gas were pouring from the facility and drifting toward the densely populated neighborhoods that surrounded the complex. A light wind carried the toxic cloud directly over the shanty towns and established communities where hundreds of thousands of people lay sleeping. The gas moved silently through the narrow streets and crowded residential areas. Families woke to the acrid smell and burning sensation, but most had no idea what was happening or how to protect themselves. Many rushed outside, thinking they were escaping a house fire, only to run directly into the toxic cloud that was spreading through their neighborhood. The effects were swift and devastating. Children were often the first to succumb, their smaller bodies unable to withstand even brief exposure to the concentrated chemical vapor. Adults who had been healthy hours earlier found themselves gasping for breath, their eyes streaming with tears as their respiratory systems shut down. Those who survived the initial exposure faced a nightmare scenario. Hospitals throughout Bhopal were quickly overwhelmed with thousands of victims, many arriving in critical condition with symptoms doctors had never seen before. Medical staff had no experience treating methyl isocyanate poisoning, and no antidotes to offer patients who were literally drowning in their own bodily fluids. The lack of emergency preparedness became tragically apparent as the crisis unfolded. No evacuation plans existed for the neighborhoods surrounding the plant. No warning systems were in place to alert residents of the chemical release. No medical protocols had been established to treat mass casualties from toxic gas exposure. Throughout the early morning hours, the death toll continued to climb. Bodies lined the streets as families fled their homes in desperate attempts to escape the spreading poison. Railway stations and bus terminals filled with refugees seeking to leave the city, many carrying loved ones who were already showing signs of severe chemical exposure. By dawn on December 3rd, the full scope of the disaster was becoming clear. Thousands were confirmed dead, with many more dying in hospitals throughout the city. The toxic cloud had affected an estimated 500,000 people across dozens of neighborhoods, creating a humanitarian crisis of unprecedented proportions. Union Carbide executives in the United States woke to news reports of a catastrophic accident at their Indian facility. Initial company statements downplayed the severity of the incident and suggested that local operators had failed to follow proper safety procedures. These claims would prove to be both false and deeply damaging to the company's credibility, as more details emerged about the long-standing safety problems at the Bhopal plant. The tragedy of Bhopal stands as one of history's most devastating examples of what happens when corporate profits are prioritized over human safety. What began as a routine maintenance operation became a catastrophe that claimed thousands of lives in a single night and left hundreds of thousands more with permanent injuries that persist to this day. The disaster was not the result of a single failure, but rather a systematic breakdown of safety protocols, regulatory oversight, and corporate responsibility. Union Carbide's decision to operate the facility with substandard safety equipment, reduced staffing, and deferred maintenance created the perfect conditions for catastrophe. The company's willingness to accept risks in India that would never have been tolerated at their American facilities exposed the harsh reality of how multinational corporations often view operations in developing nations. Even now, more than 4 decades later, the survivors of Bhopal continue their fight for justice and adequate compensation. The site remains contaminated, groundwater is still poisoned, and birth defects continue to plague the affected communities. The legal battles drag on, while those responsible have largely escaped accountability. The lessons of Bhopal remain as relevant today as they were in 1984. In our interconnected world, industrial safety cannot be compromised for the sake of profit margins. The victims of that terrible December night deserve more than our remembrance. They deserve a commitment that such a tragedy will never happen again.